All right, cool. Well, let's get rolling. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Do you guys see the picture of yourselves here also, or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Move that down here. All right, well, I'll get rolling. If somebody joins, we can catch them up quickly, or they can just get caught up. We'll have the recording on. So basically what happened was Ben Kinney, have you guys all heard of the Dave Ramsey kind of, it's not Total Money Makeover, but it's Financial Peace University. Have you guys heard of that?
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's basically like just kind of teaches you how to look at money differently. And so I would say that Ben Kinney's doing something similar to that, except it's, you know, it's just got a little bit of a different taste to it. So that's kind of like the concept behind this whole thing. And so what I wanted to do is just, I thought I would teach this. Hopefully we can get some interaction going on. It's actually happening live right now. Like I think Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week, he's releasing an episode, culminating in next week. I think the end of next week, he's doing a drawing for 5 $1,000 prizes and 1 $5,000 prize if you can answer these specific homework questions. So if you're super interested in this and you want to win some financial money, definitely jump onto the Win, Make, Give podcast and listen ahead and do the homework and enter to win a chance. I think the survey gets sent out like next Thursday, and then the drawing is live on Friday. So anyways, that's kind of where this is based off of. So I already went through all that stuff. So basically what he starts with is the idea that the most important thing around wealth is really your mindset. And I think all of us have been conditioned in one way, shape, or form of how we think about wealth and how we think about money. And I love the analogy. I think he said, and I think I've read this book. I think it's a short one. It's The Enlightened Gardener, I think is the name of it. And he says that they compare your mindset to like a bucket. And basically, you know, when you pour water into a bucket, it takes the shape of whatever the bucket is. So you could have a square bucket, a round bucket, a deep bucket, a shallow bucket. And no matter what the shape, no matter what the water is, it's always going to conform to that shape. And so he talks about our preconceived ideas around money and wealth tend to not be positive. And so he walks through his life story, which is a lot more interesting than mine as a child. Although I think probably, maybe not all of us, but I did, you know, have conversations about the lack of money sometimes, or at least heard those conversations in my house. My dad was a business person. He was a small business owner, and he was in computers, which was a good field to be in, but also one where there, just like any small business, there's just a lot of different ways you can slice the pie. And some of the ways that he sliced the pie weren't effective. And so we had some businesses that came and went that were really good, and then that went under. And so I kind of learned, and I guess my mindset through my life was shaped from that perspective. And I would say even today, one of my challenges from a money and wealth perspective is always to go spend money, because there were times where I saw my parents stressed in a really big way over money. And I think a lot of us, I think they say it's the number one reason for divorce and probably disagreements among spouses. And so money's a big thing. And so when you come from that environment, Ben Kinney grew up most of his childhood with his dad was in a cabin out in the woods that had no plumbing and no electricity, no running water. And they shared a bed a lot of the times, and he didn't know where he was going to get food. And he talks about how when he would go to his mom's house, even though she didn't have any money either, that you know, she would always hear the disagreements happening around money. And so it can lead to a negative connotation around money. And I'm sure everybody's heard it, but the connotation is just that, you know, money doesn't bring happiness. And so he just starts off with the idea that our mindset around wealth is really the most important thing. And it definitely is the thing that has the most profound effect on the actions that we take. And so he talked also about the lack of freedom, of always being under the gun of not having enough income or having too much debt, really can eat at your soul. And it's really, again, it causes the most amount of stress. And when you do that, you just never know how much money you're going to need to make, because you're always too busy kind of keeping up with the Joneses. And so the goal of the series is really to change the shape of your bucket. Now, if you're somebody who's already far down the path of building wealth, then hopefully we can just add a couple more ways that you can improve that journey that you're already on. And yet the reality is, and I would say, I throw myself into this bucket too, although I've done a lot of things to put myself on that path. I would say in terms of like my wealth education, I'm probably not as high as I would like to be. And so I love the definition that he uses to define wealth, because I think it applies to another word that we definitely love. And he defines wealth as being the ability to do what I want, when I want, and with whom I want. And I think all too often wealth is assigned to things like boats and big houses and fancy cars and all of these other things. And yet the reality is that when you look at what is it that we truly desire about wealth, we desire basically the freedom that wealth is going to bring. And I think that definition, and he says it in there, of do what I want, when I want, and with whom I want to do it with, is also the definition of, for most of us, of freedom. And I love this quote, and I think I understood him correctly, and I didn't have a chance to fact check myself. So if Rafael Nadal didn't say this, then he's getting credit for something. It was either Nadal or Naval. But people who are living far below their means enjoy a freedom that people living busy or being busy, upgrading their lifestyle, just can't fathom. And I just wonder how many of us are always going after the next dollar so that we can buy the next thing, and we never get to experience that definition above, that is being able to do what I want, when I want, and with whom I want. And I think a lot of times, I always use the analogy, if you've come to my classes about some of those hard days in real estate when I would drive by the guy on the lawnmower, knowing that after he mowed the number of lawns that he needed to mow that day, that he could go home and sit on his couch and watch TV, and his phone wasn't going to ring, and no one was going to be calling him saying a deal was blowing up or anything like that. Like, some days I was really jealous of that guy mowing the lawn. For whatever reason, that was my thing. Maybe you have a different thing that you look at. But that was my thing. Do any of you guys have like that job where when you're really stressed out, you're like, why don't I just go be the bank teller or whatever?
Oh, that was just me last night dealing with a couple deals.
Jack, what's yours? I could tell from that smile that you've got one.
I used to always think it was running a pier at some beach somewhere. Just
Yeah.
in charge of checking the people in to go out and go fishing and go out and go fishing yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, like go run your shift from 8 to noon and then go fish the rest of the day type thing.
Right.
Nice. Akiko, how about you? Do you have one? A job that when you get really stressed out, you always say like, man, I wish I could go do this.
Raising children.
Raising children? All right, awesome. Joan, are you there or no?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, what's yours?
You know, every once in a while when I'm stressed a little bit, I think, gosh, because I was an RN before I got into real estate, and I think, gosh, if I just would have stayed there, I'd be retired. I'm not
Yeah.
ready to retire, so.
Yeah,
But
no, I hear you.
yeah, no, I'm here. I'm just not showing my face today.
No, that's okay. Cindy, how about you? What's yours? Are you there? All right, Karen, I'm going to skip to you. What's your job that you always think about? Oh, all right.
Her mic isn't working.
Okay. Well, I'll quit calling people out. Oh, she put it in the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is go into, so as we think about mindset, so that's our goal for this first episode, is just to talk about mindset and how can we expand our mind and how can we begin to think about wealth in order to kind of get onto that path. And then as we go into the next series and episodes, we're going to talk about really specific things that we can do, and as a group hopefully we can bring some of these things back, go do these exercises with our own business, with our own life, and then come back as a group and share what works, some of our ahas, and hopefully help each other get on that path even faster. So we're going to jump into 5 reasons to grow your wealth. So number 1 is, I think, one of the least fun ones to talk about, and also probably the most real, and that is that we need to be prepared for what could happen. You know, there's nothing glamorous about this one, and yet it's probably the number 1 reason why we should all be thinking about wealth, and that is emergencies of any kind. So under the health category, it's like, how many people do you guys all know that have been going on kind of living life business as usual, assuming that we're always going to be in great health, that our family's always going to be in great health, and that we're just going to keep making the same money. And the reality is, for those of us on this call that were in real estate in 2008, it doesn't even have to be something around health. It could be an economic issue. It could be COVID, which just happened. You know, those things are all outside of our control. And so having wealth, which we'll define that later, is definitely going to be kind of your safety net around the unexpected. So natural disasters are a certain thing. You know, I've heard several speakers talk about being able to charter a private plane to go pick up their relative who's ill and take them to a special medical center. Or, I mean, I had a situation, my grandfather, when I was, let's see, how that was 4 years ago, I think, that he passed away. And actually about 4 years ago right now that he moved in with me. And we were able to completely remodel our walkout basement into an apartment. And my grandmother and my grandfather, who had ALS, he had progressed into the stages where, you know, he couldn't really care for himself anymore. And they were in their early 80s. And my grandma just wasn't able to care for him completely by herself. So we redid our basement, turned it into a 1-bedroom apartment, put in a kitchen, and made the bathroom wheelchair accessible and all that stuff. And it allowed us to have them move in with us. We financed that whole thing, never asked them for anything. Being able to do stuff like that, again, I wasn't preparing for that, but having that additional income and having the savings allows you to do stuff like that. The second thing is opportunity. You know, Warren Buffett famously says that the greatest distribution of wealth happens during downturns.
I will do that. All right.
Not up markets.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And so just thinking of, are you going to have the opportunity to take advantage of opportunity when opportunity presents itself? You know, during 2008, I'm sure, I feel very confident in saying, and if you aren't in this group, then maybe you need to consider a different field. But if all of us could go back in time and have about $1 million to invest in real estate circa 2010, I think we would all do it in a heartbeat in Columbus, because We probably wouldn't be on this call right now if we all would have done that. And yet the reason why most people didn't wasn't because there wasn't a plethora of opportunity, or most of the people on this call that were in the business didn't want to do it or recognize the opportunity. It was because we didn't have the wealth to do it. And so, so definitely downturns create that opportunity. The next thing is leverage. You know, Ben in his podcast talks about the fact that actually leverage, when you survey why people are happy who are wealthy, the biggest reason is not actually because of the things that they get to buy or even the experiences that they get to have. It's the fact that they have the ability to not do what they don't enjoy doing. You know, how many times, and so he goes back, and I think the example was so awesome, so I'm going to use it again, is he thought back to the time when his clutch went out on his car, and he said it was going to cost him like $800 to get the clutch replaced, and it was $300 in parts. And so instead of just paying the $800, he went out and spent $300 on parts, pulled his car into his parents' front yard, and spent 5 days replacing the clutch in his car. He said he wishes he would have had somebody in his life that would have explained to him that he was, by taking 5 days off of work, he was costing himself $1,000 in order to save 500. But in his mind, it was just the idea of paying somebody else to do something that he could do himself just wasn't something that he thought about. And so how many times are you, like for me, I love mowing the lawn, obviously with my lawnmower example, but how many times are you out mowing the lawn when you would rather be spending time with your kids because maybe you're not in the position that you want to be where you would pay somebody? I often, when I'm talking to you guys, and maybe some of you on this call, I've said this to, but I think in real estate, we have this like one-track mind around the millionaire real estate agent model, which is obviously a great model that I believe in. And yet we think that the only type of leverage that exists is with an assistant in our business. And my conversation to you would be, how much time do you spend taking care of things at home? How much time do you spend taking care of things at home in the evenings that take away your time and your ability to relax, that you could hire off, that are going to be much less expensive than hiring an admin? You know, could you hire somebody for $150 or $200 every 2 weeks to come clean your house? Because for the 5 days leading up to doing a deep clean in your house, you dread it. You know, could you go and spend a little bit extra on prepared meals so that you don't have to cook? Because otherwise you're going to go spend the same amount on fast food when you have a stressful day, and instead, you know, be able to do that. I can't tell whose dog is barking, but if you don't mind muting yourself, that would be awesome. So just thinking about leverage in a different way. So they say the number one reason why wealthy people say on surveys that they're happy is because of the leverage piece. It's buying your time back. So that either allows you to spend more time doing money-making, money-producing activities, or it allows you to spend more time with your loved one. Both are great. And to piggyback on that, although we're going to have a whole episode on saving money and how to do that really well in order to accelerate wealth, saving money isn't always the secret. The mental health and happiness that comes from being able to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, and with whom you want to do it with is super important. I had already said all that. So the fourth reason is legacy. So most of us really do care about the legacy that we leave. And I think I'll speak from my own experience. When I think of the word legacy, I think that's somebody that has a lot more wealth than I do that worries about legacy. And yet at the end of the day, we leave a legacy with the people, whether it's one person or 1 million people, we all leave a legacy. And the reality is that it's going to be really, really difficult to leave a legacy without wealth, because of the definition of legacy. And I should have looked this up like in Webster's definition, but I believe the definition to be is what lives on beyond your life. And the reality is that very often it's going to take some kind of wealth. It's not necessarily buying things for people, but it's setting up a charity where things can live on beyond you. So, you know, I think there could be a legacy in business, maybe not your life, but when you step away from your business, is your business continuing to represent what you worked so hard to create? And the only way you're able to do that is through wealth, which then moves into leverage and ultimately creates a legacy. And all that is driven by your why. And then the last one, which is really one of my favorite ones, is to create memories and have experiences. I mean, when I think back to being a kid and when I talk to my kids, like when you ask your kid, what was the best part about your childhood? How often do you hear a kid say it was this bike that got bought for them, or this house that they lived in, or this boat that they had? No, it was, sometimes those can contribute to the experience, but ultimately they're going to talk about what it felt like to ride on that boat, or what they were able to do with that bike. And it's ultimately the experiences and the memories that get created. And he uses the example, Ben Kinney's really good friends with Jay Papasan, who helps Gary Keller write all the books. And he talks about how Jay was talking to a mentor, and it was coming up on spring break week, and the mentor asked Jay, you know, hey, where are you going for spring break? And Jay said, well, you know, I think we're going to sit at home. You know, we're just going to relax at home. And I think Jay's kids were, I think they said they were like 10 and 8 or something. And the person looked at him and said, do you realize that probably about 6 years from now, and probably not even that many, being somebody that has a 9-year-old, they're not going to want to hang out with you anymore. You know, they're not going to want to do things with you. And the reality is you probably only have 6 weeks left in your life where you're going to get to hang out with your kids on spring break. Do you really want to spend it sitting at home? And 2 weeks out, he was able to pivot off of that and go schedule a vacation to create experiences or memories with his kids. But the reality is, had he not created wealth and had the opportunity to do that, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to create those memories. So, or at least in the way that he did. And so creating wealth is definitely something that can lead to memories and experience. So what I want to do now is take 30 seconds just for you guys to think back on these 5 things. Think of a time when, and I shared some of mine, when a lack of wealth has held you back from doing one of those things. Like, just think about maybe a time in your life. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I'm not going to be that long. And I won't make anybody talk if you don't want to, but I'm going to ask for people to share 1 or 2 things with the group. So think about it and write it down. All right, awesome. Who wants to volunteer? All right, Patrick, go ahead.
Well, so maybe like not so much the lack of wealth, but I think so. I'm kind of in that same kind of boat as Ben Kinney was. Like one of my things I like to do is work on stuff and cars and things like that and mechanical stuff. But like recently, you know, I had the opportunity to, you know, change some spark plugs and some gaskets in one of my cars, and it's something I could easily do, but it was to the point where I'm like, all right, by the time I do that, it's probably going to be 4 or 5 hours. Like, I just took it to the dealer, and it actually ended up being cheaper than what they had quoted me. So, like, that alone was just 4 or 5 hours, and then the leverage. That's kind of the leverage thing, and then the just being prepared for what could happen. Obviously, with what we just kind of went through with everything kind of being shut down, you know, just having a little bit of excess savings. Because I had, probably like everybody else, several clients who said, hey, we're going to put everything on hold until all this kind of goes over. So having that kind of savings just kind of to get you through those rough times, like I wasn't stressed at all about, clients telling me they weren't going to look at houses.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anybody else?
There was a time where I was living at or probably above, and there it was tough living paycheck to paycheck, juggling things around to make sure you're paying all the bills and still met all my obligations. But I remember going on vacation, able to getting there, running the place, and so forth, but not really being able to afford all the extras, renting the bikes, all sorts of beach chairs and umbrellas and all that, because that was just stretching a little bit too far. And ever since I got myself to the point in my life where I'm living below my means, like you said in the beginning, it's right. It's much more free. Be able to know that you can do what you want. A lot of times you still don't choose to do those extra things, but it's not because you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely understand that, and yeah, I think he did talk about that in the beginning of the episode around the fact that we get caught up in keeping up with the Joneses and trying to do everything that everybody else is doing, and that definitely keeps us from that. Anybody else wanna chime in or have any examples that you want to share? No? All right. I'm struggling to get to that chat. I see something in there. Oh, yeah, he was. Jack, you were breaking up a little bit. I don't know if there's an adjustment you can make on your mic.
Probably too far away.
Okay. You're good. All right, cool. So the next list, and they always joke on Ben Kinney's podcast because Ben loves lists. And so there's always a ton of lists, which I like because it makes it easy to represent his stuff. But he goes through the 10 reasons why people don't achieve wealth. And so number one reason, and that goes right along with mindset, is that they don't think that it's possible. They think kind of like what I talked about with legacy, you're programmed to believe that everybody else can achieve it, but that's just not something that I can do. And so I think it's just really, really digging deep down into your mindset. And I think the reality is that building wealth is simply just another system and another model to follow. And when you realize that it's not something that you're born with, like some special skill, it's really just a system and a model that you need to implement into your life, I think it becomes a lot more attainable. So that's one of the goals of this course. The second thing is, and this is probably maybe even more common than they don't think that they can do it, is they don't make it a priority. For some people it is. The most important thing is having the same car as your neighbor, or having the same, house as your family member, or, when we talk about money and like household relationships around, husbands and wives or significant others, how many families are destroyed by money, because one person thinks that, the other person has it too good, or that they think that they're better than other people because they've taken the time to implement the system. So I think a lot of people don't make it a priority, and then it's too hard to point thumbs, not fingers, in terms of why you don't have wealth. And so they just say that, well, they got lucky, versus understanding that person that they're talking about made building wealth a priority, whereas they made something else a priority. Another point on it that I loved, and this one really made me think, is, tons of us call ourselves learning based. And I would say if you're on this call, you should consider yourself a learning based individual. And yet the reality is how many times are we talking about books on leadership, about books to be a better real estate agent, all of those things. And then how many of us are actually reading books or seeking out books to learn about money? Money is a different thing, and how to think about money and how to leverage money and all of those different things. It's something completely different than just, even though mindset is the first step, like there are models and systems and people that have done it before us that can show us the best way to do it. And yet I would venture to guess that if I asked you guys to raise your hands, how many of you read more books about how to learn about money versus other things, that probably very few of you would raise your hand, and that would be me included. And so I thought that was a very interesting point when we think about it as a priority. Number 3 is they don't make a plan around money. So again, that kind of goes back to the models and systems conversation. Have you ever created a written plan around making more money or creating wealth? Meaning, even if you have a business plan on how to sell more houses, what are you doing with that money? Because again, I'll call myself out. Has there ever been a time where you did your income taxes and at the end of the year, you saw that number on there and then you looked at your bank account and you were like, whoa, wait a second. Like when I first got into real estate, I was going to be really excited about making 50 grand a year. And I had a lot of tax returns that showed much bigger numbers than that. And yet my bank account didn't reflect the difference between 50 grand and the number on the tax return. So, do we have a plan to create wealth, or are we just hoping it's going to happen on its own? And this kind of goes along with it. If we did create a plan, did we stick to it? And then the next level of that, did we stick to it long enough, or is it kind of like a diet where we have all the best intentions and yet, 2 weeks in, we just have one extra cheat day. And then by the time we get a month and a half in, it's like, New Year's resolution, what? I think that Valentine's Day is the magic day for that usually. So number 5 is they choose now over later, otherwise known as instant gratification. And the example that they use in this is like mind blowing. So does anybody remember what the cost of an Apple iPod was when it came out? Does anybody have any guesses? Just throw them out there.
$3.99.
Anybody else? So Patrick, did you Google it, or is that just
No.
a guess?
No, I kind of remember when they came out, and because I was in high school and I couldn't get one, and my brother had like this really generic MP3 player that I used to borrow from him to listen to music on, and everybody else in my high school had iPods.
Well, it is $3.99, and the example that he used though is if instead of buying the iPod for $3.99, you would have bought $399 worth of Apple stock, how much do you think that Apple stock would be worth now?
Probably $50,000 or something.
Anybody else have guesses? Heather, what do you think? Just throw out a number.
I don't know, 2,000.
Jack?
Millions.
I don't know.
Marcia, what'd you say?
I say millions.
Jack?
No,
I say 500,000.
It's 58,000.
Oh my God.
And so what Ben said, he's like, I think I have 3 of those somewhere around my house that I'm not using anymore. And so he, you know, he just said like that would have been $166,000. And the reality is, whether that sounds like a lot or a little to you on the call, and I'm sure everybody has different feelings around that, the reality is for the average American, if they had $166,000 more in their retirement account than they do, that might be, you know, 10 times what they have or more. And I mean, a lot of people don't have anything. And so again, it's changing the way that we think about money, and learning about the power of it. And the reality is, I don't know about you guys, but I never got taught about money in school. And if you weren't blessed enough to have family or friends around you that taught you some of the rules of money, it's, you know, there's no reason why you would. Number 6 reason why people don't grow wealth is they value entertainment over education. Obviously pretty self-explanatory, but how many people would go on vacation 3 or 4 times a year and spend $2,000 or $3,000, but would never, ever, ever go to family reunion or mega camp or, you know, any of those places because they didn't want to spend the money? There's a lot. And so again, that's the opportunity that we have. And I will say one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about Keller Williams, I mean, I think most of you guys know this already, but my degree in college was in meteorology. So I'm really good at like telling you how many inches of snow is going to come in a snowstorm. And yet when I started as a real estate agent, I literally took 0 business classes in college. I knew nothing about business. And, you know, by the time I was, how old was I when I took this job? 35-ish, 36. You know, I had built a team where we were selling $33 million a year, making as more money than I ever thought. I owned 12 investment properties. I had all of those things. I was, you know, a boat, a nice house, all those things. And I got all of that because Keller Williams taught me how to think about money differently. I mean, I didn't know anybody in my personal life that owned a rental property. The amount of leverage that rental properties give you and that whole like nest egg that you talk about with owning rental properties is something that, you know, you can't explain that feeling of having that. And that's education. And I paid, I mean, 8 years in a row, I paid out of my own pocket to go to those trainings and went to every regional training and went to go see David Osborne, you know, down in Cincinnati because I wanted to learn about money. And I still consider myself a novice when it comes to money, but getting around people that do bigger things than you, there's a value in that that's really impossible to put a dollar figure on, in my opinion. So the number 7 reason why people don't grow wealth is they look for short-term solutions to solve long-term problems. So they're always looking for the next best thing. And some examples of those are Bitcoin, the get rich quick CDs, even though now it's like webinars, right? Not CDs anymore. Lottery tickets, and fill in the blank, right? You know, they're always looking and, you know, they go into, they decide that they need more money for their retirement account. And instead of going to somebody that knows, they go ask their neighbor about how they bought more Bitcoin. And then unfortunately they bought at the top, and the next month it's only worth half of what it was when they bought it, you know, because they are looking for that short-term get rich quick conversation. This is a big one, I think, and it kind of goes hand in hand with that memories or the leverage conversation that we talked about. But I believe that if you polled people who wouldn't consider themselves to be wealthy, that the number 1 reason would be this, that people believe that they have to choose between wealth and a happy life, meaning that the only way that you can achieve wealth is through working a ton. And basically, if you achieve wealth, you know, how many times, maybe you guys have said this before, how many times have you said, or heard somebody say, well, yeah, but they have all that money, but they don't have a life. I mean, that's the number one statement that in my world that I hear people say, and I've said it before about people. And I think that we kind of use that as an excuse to legitimize our position, which we believe to not be wealthy. And so that's the reason is, you know, and that just reinforces in our mind the fact that we can't be wealthy and be happy. And I definitely don't believe that to be the case. What do you guys think about that? I just want to stop here for a second on this topic before going on to the next. Does anybody else have anything to add to that one? Because I think it's a big one. Should I make it really awkward? I know if I sit long enough with a room full of real estate agents that somebody will not be able to handle the awkward silence.
I think a lot of it's just because people don't, as they're growing wealth, it becomes, I don't know, like a drug or whatever, where they just feel like they have to keep getting more and more and more, and they actually aren't utilizing it for anything. It shouldn't be a choice. I think it's just that they get caught up in it. They don't know how to stop. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I've done that myself too. I mean, I've bought things because I could, and then, you know, then you get stuck behind the 8 ball like you were talking about earlier, where you've got these bills and it's like, man, how did I make that much money and yet I have nothing more to show for it other than that material thing, which the reality is you can't be happy because you're so stressed about paying for it. So yeah, that's great.
I think piggybacking off what you said, like with when the people say like, yeah, they have all that money, but they work all the time. I think maybe too, that could be a perception thing where people like, yeah, they might work a lot of hours, but maybe they take, you know, 2 months off at the end of the year and don't work at all and just go travel. So maybe they're making up for that. So maybe they do actually enjoy, and maybe they enjoy what they do for work too. We just don't see that. You know, we don't see them gone for 2 months until they start posting all their pictures online.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. And then it's because they're lucky, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, oh man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. And this is coming from the auto mechanic who has to go to work 6 days a week all day, but yet they're like, I would never do your job because I have to work nights and weekends. Well, yeah, but Patrick also went golfing yesterday during the day while you were at work, you know, but you didn't post on Instagram, so they didn't see that.
One of the things that I struggled with, and I'm older, is back then they used to say that women were taking food off the table of men that were trying to feed their families. But I was the sole supporter of my family. So making money had a negative concept to me. So Keller Williams helps reverse that. You know, go for it. Doesn't matter whether you're male or female, whether you're putting food on the table or what you're doing with it. It's none of their business.
Yeah, I think definitely. I've been doing some reading lately. For some reason, I'm like reading 2 books at a time. One's an autobiography. I've just been loving autobiographies lately for some reason. And, you know, listening to a lot of the people that are writing autobiographies are older than me. And listening to what the world was like, even like just before I was born, and probably even when I was younger, but just didn't recognize in terms of equality for women in the workplace. There's something, you know, I just didn't, by the time I was older or old enough, and my mom's a nurse, and so she always worked. And so for me, it was just normal. But like generation before mine was, I mean, it was a big women's suffrage, you know, people moving from, or women moving from being expected to stay at home. And so that's a great point.
I was an executive and first female executive in a Fortune 100 company in this city. And I got death threats because they didn't like, and the expectations for different things were just, it was a tough situation. I was shocked.
Yeah, it's
Still there though.
And it is still there. I mean, my wife was just talking to me this weekend about how some of like the moms groups and blogs and stuff that, COVID has had a negative impact on women in the workplace, because basically oftentimes they're the ones that either feel obligated or are forced, whatever the scenario is, to take care of the kids when childcare went away. And a lot of women are having to quit their job or scale back on opportunity in order to make sure things are taken care of at home. And so, she was talking about how, the conversation is that COVID's actually been a really bad thing for equality for women in the workplace for that reason. It's just the societal expectation around it.
Wow, I never thought of that one. That's going to take a long time to recover from.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, some of the conversation about school systems is that next year it's going to be like 3 days a week this week and then 2 days a week next week, which that, unpredictable for childcare and all this. So anyways, it's an interesting conversation. So number 9 is they give up when the going gets tough. And obviously we all know this one. It's kind of goes with the diet thing, but once, it's exciting when you're losing 5 pounds a week, but then once you get into that segment where you're only losing a pound a week or a half a pound a week, or maybe you're not losing anything for a couple weeks and you have to wait 2 weeks to lose the same amount that you were losing in one day when you first started, like those types of conversations. So once things start getting tough and it's not fun anymore, it's years of, my brother actually did Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey, and they had the goal of getting debt free. And 2 years in a row, they skipped our family vacation that we all went on. And it was, there was a big part of me that wanted to be like, dude, don't worry about it. Just come, but ironically enough, he's in the entertainment industry. He lives in Nashville and he works in hotels doing light and sound for conferences and stuff. And guess who is really happy that they were debt free as of last fall, when his hours and pay got cut by 60%. And he was one of the few people that got to keep their job at all. But it's crazy. And that's just a great example of making the sacrifices now in order to be able to have that later. The last one is they don't find great, wealthy role models in their life. And I think this is one that if I was putting together a top 10 list, I probably never would have thought to include, but he got really, really specific. And so he's going to have some of these people on, but he named 3 wealthy role models that we should all have in our life. The first one is a tax advisor that understands money at a super high level. And I'd love to say that every accountant I've ever met understands money at the same level, but just because you're a CPA doesn't mean that you really truly understand money. So you might know how to file a tax return, but those two things are very different. So I would encourage all of you as a first step to go out and think about where these things are in your life right now and analyze that and go find somebody good if you don't already have somebody. The second thing is a real estate advisor. Now, hopefully you guys can take a trip to the bathroom and look in the mirror and identify a good real estate advisor. However, here's my thing for you though. I would encourage you to make sure that you have a great real estate advisor that's outside of your family, because what I would always tell clients when I was selling is my number one value in the transaction to you, beyond giving you the data and advice, is that I am not emotional about this purchase or this sale the way that you are. And so my question to you is, do you really feel like you're better than everybody else, that when you're buying or selling a property, that it wouldn't be a good idea to have somebody else who has no skin in the game give you some advice on what to price your house or whether this is a good investment? So it doesn't have to necessarily be hiring another real estate agent. However, having that advisor that you can run a scenario by when you're buying for yourself is not a bad idea. And then the last thing is a stock advisor. Obviously, diversification is always a really good thing. And so having somebody who really knows their stuff, not your neighbor who recommends Bitcoin, is always a good thing. All right, so the last part of the conversation of this this episode or session or part of the series is the wealth building triangle, which I thought was really, really valuable to kind of put it in simple form. So he talked about the fact that assets like real estate, stocks, bonds, companies, collectibles are all things that we all want and need, right? Because that's what we're talking about, building wealth through assets. The interesting thing though is, how do we get to those assets? And then how do those assets create income for us? And that is where we, I think, need to switch our mindset. So I would say that traditionally, this is the way that we think about money. We say, I mean, how many of us don't own real estate because we said we aren't making enough money to pay for the down payment? And so if that's been a response that you've given, then you're always saying step one is time for money. So meaning that you feel like the only way you're going to get ahead is to work more. And then the next thing is, hopefully that money creates cash flow or income. And then that income allows you to buy an asset. So that's, I would say, like, that's the way that we're trained by society. I'm not sure I ever had a class that showed me that this was the equation. But ultimately, even when we talk about buying real estate to our clients, you probably often say, save your money for a down payment, then buy it, and then you will eventually have an asset, because we know that the average value of someone who owns their own home is $1 million. I mean, it's like, what, 50 times larger than a renter. But what I'm going to say now is, let's flip the wealth building triangle upside down, and let's think about it from the perspective of what an asset can do for you. So if you flip it upside down and say the purpose of an asset is to create cash flow, and then put time for money on the very bottom, then that changes our mindset into what can we do to maximize the money that we're getting from the time that we're spending. And so that's what we're going to dive into as we move into this next series, or into this series, and think about everything from a goal, from the perspective that the goal of this series is to have an asset that creates cash flow. Because when you have assets that are creating cash flow, then now you have the freedom. That's step one in having the freedom to do what you want, when you want, and with whom you want to do it. So that is the end of my presentation for today. I'm going to encourage you guys to visit winmakegive.com. You can download his free workbook. He has all kinds of spreadsheets and different tracking systems on there to help you kind of through this process, which the next step, which is next week, is when we're going to get into this. However, like I said, there is a contest going on, and it does end next week. And I think, let me see, I think today, like the fourth in the series came out already. So I know you guys love hearing me talk, and I'd still love for you to come back. But if you want to be a part of that contest, you're going to have to sneak ahead of our series and our cadence and listen to those podcasts. They're like 30 to 50 minutes each. And then he takes different pieces from each one. And then the night before, I think next Thursday, he'll have a series of questions sent out to you that you'll have to send back to enter to win. and he's gonna give 5 $1,000 prizes and then 1 $5,000 prize. Next week, though, if you want to follow along in our series, or if you just want to work through this as a group, which I'd love it if we have a great group, episode 2, we will be going over next Tuesday at 10 a.m., not 11. Had to switch the time for next week, and so I would love to have you guys there. We have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any ahas or anything questions that you want to share with the group?
What's the name of the guy again?
Ben Kinney, Kinney. And the whole podcast is Win, Make, Give podcast. I mean, I could listen. Ben Kinney's like my KW crush, to be honest with you. So he's like my hero. So I love his stuff, but it's really, really good stuff. And he's a humble guy.
Can I put a plug in too for book club?
Yes.
Because it kind of goes along with all of this. It's Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, which was a recommendation by Troy. And it's about mastering your mind and defying the odds. So it kind of gets you in the mindset of all of this, which has been really good this morning. But I don't know if you can see this. June 24th at 4. It's a good book.
It's a great book, and parts of it are difficult to read because it gets intense. And yeah, I agree with you in terms of like the environment that we're in right now with everything that's going on. It's absolutely the type of perspective. I think it definitely puts perspective on what's going on right now that very few books I've ever read have been able to do. So
Yeah, it's really good, guys.
What's the name of the book again?
It's called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. He was down and out. He was in a bad way, and he became a Navy SEAL. And it's just a really, really good book. And when Troy mentioned looking in the mirror, I look in the mirror so totally differently now than I did before I read this book. It's good.
Okay, all right.
Really good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's intense though. I mean, it's an autobiography and it's intense. I'll give a plug for the Audible version. So on Audible, they go through and he has a reader read the book, but then after they like a number of chapters, they come on together and do like a 5 to 10 minute, just like podcast style conversation with David about where he adds in some extra stuff. So if you're somebody that enjoys listening to Audible, it's on there and it's very good as well.
Thank
So
you.
if you're not a reader.
Well, I'm a reader, but
Yeah, it's good. It's one of those books that I think I listened to it in like 3 or 4 days because I just couldn't put it down.
Yep.
It's very good.
This has been good too. Thank you, Troy.
All right, awesome guys. Well, thank
Troy.
you so much. Again, you guys deserve so much credit for showing up today because it really shows that you're learning based and you care about your wealth. And for that, I'm grateful. And feel free to reach out to me individually if there's anything else that I can do to help. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Thanks.
Thank you.
if not before.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.